Tonight, missiles continue to fly in the Middle East despite Israel and Iran agreeing to a ceasefire just hours ago. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Kendall Bartley. Brandon Cameraman is off tonight. That ceasefire coming hours after Iran struck a United States military base in the country of Qatar earlier today. In a social media post, President Trump says the ceasefire will be phased in over the next 24 hours, with a 6-hour window open for the two countries to wind down and complete any in-progress missions. Following that window, the ceasefire will begin going into effect, with Iran and Israel stopping attacks and a full ceasefire going into effect Wednesday night at midnight. Now, we do have team coverage on today's developments. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar standing by to discuss Iran's strike on the U.S. military base in Qatar, while national correspondent Matt Gelka discusses why Iran is looking to Russia for support in the wake of Saturday's bombing of Iranian nuclear sites. First, let's turn to national correspondent Atra El-Nashar to discuss the Iranian strike on the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, as President Trump confirming in a social media post that the missiles were intercepted and no Americans or Qataris were killed or injured.
President Trump calling Iran's foiled attempt to strike Al Udeid air base in Qatar a very weak response to the U.S. strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites. The president also making clear he expects this to be the end of the violence, not only between the United States and Iran, but throughout the region. In a Truth Social post Monday afternoon, the president says, "I am pleased to report that no Americans were harmed and hardly any damage was done. Most importantly, they've gotten it all out of their system, and there will hopefully be no further hate. I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same." Qatari officials confirmed to media outlets Iran gave them a general warning that American bases could be attacked. Immediately after the strikes, Iran made it a point to say the number of missiles they used was equal to the amount of bombs the U.S. dropped on its nuclear sites. This is widely being interpreted as a symbolic move, a sign that Iran may be ready to de-escalate hostilities with the United States.
What we are seeing is calculation on behalf of the Iranians to say, okay, we've responded to the United States attack from this past weekend. Now we need to look for the off-ramp where we can work our way to the negotiating table.
There are some 40,000 American troops stationed throughout the Middle East. Bases across the region have been preparing for an escalation in hostilities and potentially incoming fire. Meanwhile, there are still questions about how effective the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites were. More time is required for definitive answers, but President Trump, despite more cautious remarks from others in his administration, insists Iran's nuclear program was obliterated. President Trump was with his national security team as the early information about these Iranian strikes was starting to come out. And Tuesday morning, he's set to depart for The Hague, where he'll join a NATO summit, and allies there are certain to encourage de-escalation. At the White House, I'm Atra El-Nashar.
Now, following this morning's attack, oil prices plunged more than 7%. The market was expressing relief that Iran's response to U.S. military strikes was far more limited and symbolic than feared. Oil prices started tumbling Monday after Iranian missiles launched toward a U.S. base in Qatar and they were intercepted. The more than 7% drop represents the biggest one-day decline since early April. The steep sell-off wiped out an initial spike Sunday night, driven by concerns Iran could lash out by targeting energy infrastructure in the Middle East. Now, we also heard tonight from Oregon Congresswoman Val Hoyle on the U.S.'s decision to strike Iran Saturday. In an interview with KVAL's Gold Meadows, Representative Hoyle shared concerns about what she says is a dangerous road for the U.S. to be on. Here's a snippet of that interview.
The president promised no foreign wars.
Right. And when you bomb Iran, you're pulling us into another war into the Middle East. This is a military action that we were not briefed on. He didn't even bother to brief Democrats at all. We represent half the country too. And the president should be acting in the best interest of our nation He said he wasn't going to drag us into a war, and here we are. My hope is that, again, Iran had a measured response, that we aren't going to see something different. Now, they have said that they have terror cells here in the United States. But do you know who's in charge, who the administration put in charge of overseeing our terrorism prevention? A 22-year-old who just graduated from college, who has no experience.
There were calls to impeach President Trump following the initial orders to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, this without congressional approval. So how valid of a reason is this for impeachment, seeing that President Obama has done the same thing?
The Republicans have control of the House and the Senate, and a motion for impeachment will not go through. I am not going to waste my time on things that aren't going to happen. I'm extremely concerned, and I've signed on to a bipartisan war powers resolution. Again, every president has abused this power, and I believe in holding the president accountable. He's making his foreign policy declarations not in the way that you would want a presidential administration to act, right? Treating it with the gravity that it should be treated with. Instead, he's making announcements on social media, and that's just embarrassing.
Now, we have our full interview with Representative Hoyle on our YouTube page. You can scan that QR code on your screen now. That will take you there. In that interview, she also discusses recent protests throughout the state and the president's big, beautiful bill, which is being considered in the Senate. Now, you can also get reaction from both of our senators on our website, kval.com. And we not only got reaction from local representatives, we also spoke with people throughout our region today to get their thoughts on the conflict.
I just think we should just try to uplift each other during this hard time and just hopefully try to keep very much positive and good faith that hopefully things will die down eventually, because I really hate that this is happening.
It's scary, but it might have been necessary, and I think Iran proved that when they targeted innocent civilians, hospitals, and apartments instead of only the military.
And we want to hear from you at home today. We are asking, are you concerned about a broader war in the Middle East? So far, pretty split decision. 79 people saying yes, 63 saying no. If you'd like to take part in this poll, scan the QR code on your screen. That will take you to our website, kval.com, and that is an anonymous poll. So if you'd like to share your thoughts, we would love to learn about them. And now we turn back to our national correspondent, Matt Galka, as Iran could still be trying to solidify relations with Russia as the Middle Eastern nation looks for allies where it can, following the U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities.
Iran's turning to Russia for help in the wake of U.S. strikes on the country's nuclear facilities. Iran's foreign minister was in Moscow Monday meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, with Putin calling the U.S. strikes unprovoked and unjustified. Former Russian president and Putin ally Dmitry Medvedev posted on X support for Iran, writing in part, "The future production of nuclear weapons will continue," and suggesting countries are ready to give Iran their own nuclear weapons.
I think it's a bizarre response, but I also don't know that that guy speaks for President Putin or for the Russian government. They've been very consistent that they don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
The president also reacting via Truth Social, saying the N-word for nuclear shouldn't be used so casually. And I guess that's why Putin's the boss. The reaction underscores the belief that the U.S. and Israel aren't the only two countries trying to prevent a nuclear Iran, since U.S. military installations in nearby friendly Middle Eastern countries are obvious targets.
This is an existential threat not only to Israel, but to the stabilization within the Middle East, but also America. So the president's been very, very consistent in the idea that he wants to have a diplomatic channel, but he also has been consistent that Iran cannot possess a nuclear weapon.
Russia's involvement is mostly being dismissed for now, with Moscow's Middle East influence not as strong as it once was.
What has Russia done? Issued a strongly worded statement and welcomed Iran's foreign minister to Moscow. So I think this is mostly just bluster to cover up the fact that Russia is a pretty fickle friend to have in the world.
It's unclear if Russia will or can support Iran with military intervention. Russia is involved in its own war with Ukraine that's straining its resources, and at Monday's meeting, Russian officials stressed a diplomatic way out of the conflict. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka.